Hello everyone and welcome back. This is Sakiziel here, and today I'll be diving into another bit of lore about the world of Guem. Today's episode is on the Naval Coalition. It was formed as an alliance between 6 nations, though it has expanded since. The 6 founding nations, which are represented as stars on its flag, are Acadia, Ausonia, Avalonia, Snowcourt, Spoya, and Solaria. Because it has expanded over the years, it has spread quite far across Guem, and I'll be showing which territories are part of it, going from west to east, starting with the continent of Pelov. In Pelov, both the windswept peaks inhabited by Harpies and Avians, which would be anthropomorphic bird people, and the Kingdom of Wonderland, which has many vassals within its borders, both joined, mainly for the reason of security, because there was a large bandit presence in the wastelands to the south, and pirate presences in the waters around. In fact, there was one particular group of pirates whose leader referred to herself as the Pirate Queen, who was terrorizing the coast of Wonderland. So they were motivated by security. Next is Ungoro Island, which isn't really a state, rather it's a massive prison island, which I was inspired by the Ungoro crater from Warcraft. This also happens to be where much of the oil used comes from. But more about the island will come in its own dedicated video. Next is Spoya, which also joined for the reason of security, because as you can see, in the southwest is Clint City, which, while it is a den of crime still, it was much worse just before the Naval Coalition was founded. It used to be a den of smugglers, pirates, all sorts, which were causing problems for the rest of the country. And the Coalition, as a result, ended up allowing them to mostly root out those problems. So now, the smugglers and other criminal elements have to lay low and try to avoid the attention of the Navy. Next is Avalonia, which is based off of Arthurian England. And they have a lot of knights and other soldiers. Their reason actually for joining was not actually to protect themselves, because they were doing just fine with that actually. Their reason for joining was in fact actually to protect other nations such as Spoya, who were suffering from rampant piracy. Snowcourt is another nation that did not join for their own security, but rather for the security of those around them, such as people they traded with. Snowcourt is a heavily fortified country, and as a result, the pirates didn't really have any chance of, say, sacking any port towns, and their ships are powerful enough that even to the current date in the world, the setting that is most pirate groups still do not want to fight the Navy of Snowcourt. Next would be the various states found on the continent of Nevendar. These are Acadia and Ausonia, which are 2 of the founders. The people of the Solari Desert, which is Solaria. Yeah. So as you can see, 3 of the founders were all in the same continent, but there were more that joined, such as Poldachi Gulgavine, Varor, Nozdingard, and Zia. The people of Acadia and Ausonia, as well as Solaria, all joined founded the Navy for similar reasons. They wanted protection from thieves, bandits, and so on. Pirates were just one of the threats that the coalition deals with. In fact, the Solari Desert arguably deals with more banditry on land than they have to deal with pirates at sea. But there are several trade routes that run near their coasts, and protecting those sea lanes and keeping trade open was highly to their benefit, especially since they relied quite heavily on exporting precious metals and precious gems. The Great Plains was a more recent addition. They were persuaded to join in the coalition, and when they had a bit of an issue relatively recently during turbulent events that were happening in Solaria. The gnolls and ogres, who are the dominant power within the Great Plains, although there are many lesser groups within in terms of power, they decided to raid Solaria, or rather raid some of the border towns. And when they realized that doing so would have gotten them wiped out once the conflict ended, they returned everything they had stolen and made offers, or rather promises, that they would phase out slavery, which is their main means of providing labor for their little kingdom within the Great Plains. And as a result, they were inducted. Zia joined in the naval coalition in order to get protection from Nozdingard, because Zia had actually started a war with Nozdingard some time ago. It has long since been over, but at the time, the two countries were at war, and Nozdingard, which had initially been on the back foot, was able to not only repel Zian forces, but went further to push into Zia with the intent of ensuring that Zia would never be able to threaten them again. And since that was happening, Zia joined, and because as Nas was threatened with that, potentially Zia might try to get the entire naval coalition to send forces to defeat them. They also joined the naval coalition not long afterwards, and there's a grudging peace between Nas and Zia. They still despise each other, and the only thing keeping them from going at it is that they're both members of the same alliance. Veror is another. They're one of the members who they joined not for any actual protections from piracy, but for a similar reason to Zia, in that they felt that they might be invaded by Poldachi Golgavine to the north, which is much larger than them. In order to avoid that, they joined. Which it might seem strange to some people, considering that they are an entirely landlocked nation. And lastly is Poldachi Golgavine itself, which is a very large nation, the largest in all of Evandar. However, with such a large nation, they also have a very large coastline to defend, and there were many important trade towns along their northern and eastern borders. So they joined the naval coalition in order to ensure the security of their trade routes and to make it easier to defend against pirates. which I'm sure everyone can see the theme here thus far. It's for military protection for quite a few of them from either pirates, bandits, or their neighbors. Next, we have the continent of Zeniadari. And I'm sure some of you may have noticed that I haven't mentioned anything on the southern side of the map because as all of the Naval Coalition's holdings are on the northern side. But yes. Oh, I will also mention Ulduar, which I also named after another location in Warcraft, which inspired me. In the bit about Zeniadari, because it is related. Because it belongs actually to the dwarves of Ironheart. So on Zeniadari, you can see that Ironheart, Ebonwood, Webwood, Exylvania, and Westerlin are all parts of it. Ironheart, home of the dwarves, was joined, not for their own protection because they weren't really seagoing themselves, but rather for economic reasons. The Alliance needs a lot of weapons. Cannonballs, swords, muskets, etc. And the dwarves are more than happy to produce them and sell them. Although it doesn't hurt that being a part of the coalition and helps to a degree with the fact that there are two elven nations to the south, and while dwarves and elves don't quite despise each other to the degree that it is in Warhammer Fantasy at times, they do have some past grudges against each other. So even though they weren't going to go to war anytime soon, the security does, in hindsight, also help as a just in case. Ebonwood also is the homeland of the Dark Elves, who they actually joined for military security against the orcs of, well, I named in this country after Grimgor Ironhide in Warhammer Fantasy because I rather like the orcs in Warhammer Fantasy. So yes, within the country of Grimgor, if you can even call it that, given how many disparate orc clans there are always vying for control over there, not to mention the goblins there who have been more or less vassalized by the orcs, if not just outright enslaved. But yes, it is for security, predominantly against the orcs. Not so much against the Blasted Lands, which, while it is pirate territory and is directly adjacent, the Blasted Lands are controlled by the Sun Elves, who have their own non-aggression pact with Ebonwood. Next is Webwood, which is home of the Arachne. They joined for a similar reason as Ebonwood. However, their threat was not only any orcs who actually traveled across the sea to assault their coastlines, but also potentially Exylvania to the northeast. Westerlin joined for a similar reason as Avalonia, because they were able to secure themselves against pirates fairly well. Their main concern actually was the security of the nations around them, such as Webwood, considering that Exylvania has a habit of trying to take over the entire continent, which for anyone who's ever played the Battalion Wars games, yeah, that is where I got the inspiration for the name from, and some other inspirations regarding Exylvania come from history. As for Exylvania itself, how and why they ended up joining the Naval Coalition, considering how many nations within the same continent of them they've had war with, Well, it was motivated primarily by the fact that not only do they have to defend their borders against piracy, but they also, given the existence of the coalition, felt that if they didn't join, that eventually the coalition may declare war on them. And while in the past, their military has been powerful enough for them to threaten the continent, the military aid from the rest of the naval coalition would certainly be more than they could handle. And for the last members, there is Elysium and Vergon. Elysium is actually the home of the High Elves, and the birthplace of all elfkind in the world of Guem. They were among the, relatively speaking, more recent nations to join, and that was because normally the High Elves actually kept out of the affairs of everyone else. They were fairly isolationist and really had no interest in other nations. They would trade with them, but as far as they were concerned, the rest of the world wasn't really their business, and they didn't have any business with it outside of the aforementioned trade. The most recent king and queen decided to open the country up to the rest of the world, and part of that was joining the naval coalition, joining the coalition was not contentious, but the opening up, which also resulted in the joining, that itself was contentious and actually resulted in some civil strife within Elysium, and quite a significant portion of its military deciding to make an exodus from the country as a form of protest. And Vergon itself, they actually regularly get attacked by orcs. The seafaring orcs, a group known as the Rumrudder Pirates, which, as you can see, they have a base known as the Rumrudder Fortress, as on an island to the northwest. Their reason for joining was military, just like most, but there was also the economic benefit because, with naval coalition patrols going through the waters surrounding their nation, and that they could trade more freely with the newly opened Elysium and with Zeniadari without as much worry from the orcs. So that would be all of the different nations that joined and their reasons for joining. As for the actual command structure, they have various admirals, captains, fleet admirals, etc. But the actual hierarchy is that at the very top is the Grand Admiral, who is in charge of all of the forces that are assigned to the coalition as a whole. Because the coalition has its own forces separate from the navies of the individual countries. These forces are contributed by the different member nations of the alliance and from their own militaries. Some contribute more than others, but yes, you can think of it as a communal military source. A communal military for shared interests. And on screen is the current face name actually for one of the fleet admirals, because under the Grand Admiral himself, there are several fleet admirals. Each one has a area of expertise that they cover, and they're divided by function. One of them, the currently one on screen, Admiral Saizan Akira, is charged with offensive operations, and he delegates to the various admirals, captains, so on beneath him. next is the face claim I currently use for Fleet Admiral Ymir, who is from Snowcourt, who focuses on defensive operations. I am still looking for replacements. There was a side note, because couldn't quite find anything that would describe what I had in mind for this character at the time, but I digress. There's also a covert operations unit, which has its own admiral. The covert operations unit is in charge of, well, as the name would imply, things such as intelligence gathering via spies, acts of sabotage, acts of assassination, those sorts of things. And the admiral in charge of them, which is Fleet Admiral Morana Antheus, is actually a shapeshifter, specifically a changeling, which is a type of fairy. She can look however she wants, really, and no one is even sure or what her true form even looks like, with the exception being in the fairy royal family. And because the covert ops has their assassination units, they have a variety of individuals. Sometimes the intelligence gathering crosses over with the assassinations. But next up is, well, the Fleet Admiral Astra Hokulani is in charge of two things actually: research and development, and the special forces, or also known as the elite forces. Which I am sure, or many may be wondering why she dresses like that. It's because she's eccentric, to put it mildly. Although, it wouldn't be too far off to just call her a weirdo. But uniforms are preferred, but not strictly enforced. First, if you're at certain levels of command, and Fleet Admiral Astra takes advantage of that by dressing however she pleases for the most part, partly because she makes few public appearances. But since she's in charge of research and development, you can find people within her command and who work on all manner of things, such as creating weapons that produce gas that puts people to sleep, or people who create all manner of biological horrors using alchemy that grow out of people's backs, for example, such as Dr. Hans Ergo, who made a symbiote. Or projects that try and augment the common marine, such as creating all manner of alchemical concoctions to create its super soldiers. And the elite forces, well, they contain people who use some of the more recent and higher end or exotic weaponry available to the Coalition. But they also include the Coalition's mages. Many of them are part of the elite forces. Within the elite forces, you can also find individuals who you might describe as freaks, such as Jax here, who is a test subject for one of the previous attempts at a super soldier serum. There's also a fleet admiral in charge of the exploratory forces, Admiral Wolfgang Stryger, who, as the name implies, it's his duty to explore Guem, map uncharted territories, but also to perform any sort of reconnaissance duties that do not fall under the purview of Fleet Admiral Morana and her spies. And lastly is the Grand Admiral himself, who is also a dragon, actually. And as mentioned, dragons in the setting can transform between forms. So he rarely actually goes full dragon, but still, most pirates would prefer to surrender should they see him, considering what a large dragon can do to a ship. Not to mention just what he can do to the ship's inhabitants / crew. But that aside, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this lore video about the Naval Coalition, and if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I enjoy reading and responding to them, and if you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe. Lastly, just a little disclaimer that none of the art used, aside from that flag at the very beginning, was made by or belongs to me. I don't own any of it. I just used it for face claim stuff for this little project I've been working on with my friends. So, hope you all have a wonderful day, and until next time, ta-ta!